peacemakers and engaging conflict effectively. I currently am a conflict practitioner, so that's the nature of the work that I do full time, and I work in mediation, so working in active disputes, and consulting and helping people and organizations work through conflict, as well as doing training and capacity building and helping people develop the tools and the skills that they need to be able to do it in their own way in their churches and organizations and schools. So if you're interested in looking a little bit more at the nature of my work, I've left cards on each of your chairs, and that gives you a bit of context of the work that I'm doing currently. But I came to this work through pastoral ministry, and that's my background. And it was through the inevitable conflicts that one experiences in the nature of the work, and feeling like getting stuck and realizing and had this curiosity around how can I understand conflict better? How can I be better equipped to navigate conflict, and what does it look like to do conflict well? And felt called towards that area of ministry, and just felt like that could be an expression of ministry that I could support others in. And especially I had people in my life come alongside me and work alongside me in the conflicts that I experienced that were a gift to me, and I just thought if I can do that for others in some of their most challenging circumstances, that would be a ministry and a gift that I would want to offer people. So that led me to pursuing my master's in conflict analysis and management. I did that through Royal Roads University in Victoria, and wanting to dive deeper into those skills and that capacity building. And I was led to explore this question, so this was the nature of my research, and exploring this question of what does a leader do when a complaint of emotional harm is brought to them about someone that they oversee. So if you think of it in like a 3-tier structure, and for the purposes of my research, you have a leader, so someone who's tasked with responding to that complexity. You have the accused, or the person that is the nature or the focus of the impact of harm. And then you have the complainant, the person that's raising the concern. And in this 3-tier structure, the harm is being done between these two. And you have this complaint that comes to a leader, and often it comes to a leader after this person has made attempts or has tried to work it through themselves, or it's been like a period of time where that has not been resolved, and then it's brought to the leader's attention to have additional support and to help them navigate what they do in the circumstance. So you have this complexity. And I did this research in an MB context, so I interviewed MB church leaders across Canada to explore how they would respond to this question, what are some of the complexities. And the research mostly outlined the challenges, it mostly illuminated the problems, it mostly identified how challenging it is for a leader in that position to respond. And some of the nuances were just the nature of the harm was so elusive. So it's subjective to the experience of a complainant. How do you measure someone's subjective experience of harm? Also with the power dynamic, this behavior happening to this person is not the same. They don't treat their supervisor in the same way that they would treat someone in a position of power under them. So this leader that's responding often hasn't experienced that same nature of harm. So they're confused, or they find that challenging to understand the complainant's experience. So it's really elusive, really subjective. It's often not one individual instance, but with emotional harm, it's patterned over a period of time. So if you give one example, they can often explain it away, but it's the accumulated pattern of behavior that is what's measured and what takes its toll over a period of time. And then often it's also the intention of this person is not to cause harm. So they're not intending harm. They mean well, but the impacts of this person are experienced in a different way than what was intended. So what do you do with that? So these leaders are receiving this complaint. It's confusing. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to respond. There's a relationship between these two individuals. I mean, in churches in general, there's interconnected relationships, and so how do you respond to something that's sensitive in nature? So when I was doing this research, one of the large takeaways was just the empathy that I have for leaders who are put in that position to respond to a complaint of that nature, and who are tasked with that level of responsibility and complexity. I don't envy people who have to respond and discern what to do when they're receiving that nature of concern or complaint. And it also just felt personal, it mattered. I've had my own experiences of navigating this dynamic. I know leaders who have had to navigate this dynamic. And so realizing that, it mattered, and it was important how people responded. And often the impact of how a leader responds is far greater than the initial complaint itself at times. So when someone's in that position and they feel quite helpless and they don't know what to do, and they finally bring it to a leader to respond, they're kind of at their last win typically. And so there's a lot of vulnerability. They're putting their trust in a leader to be able to know what to do and how to respond. And so when that's either mishandled or poorly handled, that can have significant impacts, almost far greater, or can be greater than the impacts of the initial complaint itself. So after this research, it left me with this level of complexity. I'm interviewing leaders, they're saying we have no idea what to do, it's challenging, it's complex. And the research came away realizing, okay, there's a problem here, and there's a issue of discernment and complexity that leaders right now, church leaders in our denomination, are saying we don't know what to do with this. And that left me humbled and realizing, okay, how do we equip our leaders? What do we do about this complexity? And others like it. So this is just one scenario or one specific dynamic, but there are no shortage of conflicts that leaders are responding to and are tasked with responding, that they are saying, we are a bit out of our depth here, and we need support in how we navigate conflicts of this nature. So what are leaders to do? So I want to turn it to you and to the group. I want this to be interactive, and I hope if there's any questions at any time, so like Crystal said, if you want to note them down, or you can also ask them in this space. But want you to turn to 2 or 3 people around you. And the first piece is, can you identify with some of these specific challenges? So the nature of the concern and the complexity of the conflict I spoke to, if there's any in that 3-person dynamic, if you can relate to that, or if you've seen that or experienced that. And I'll give you, please take whatever discretion you choose to share what you'd like to share, and don't feel obligated to share anything. I know these can be quite personal in nature. So one is just, is there any identifying with that specific concern or problem? And then, if you've got time in your groups to share, how would you, in maybe a few words, capture the current challenges around the conflicts that you face in your role? So if you were to distill it into a few words or into patterns that you experience, what are some of the complexities that you find yourself bumping into when it comes to conflict in your specific context and role? So take a few minutes in groups of 3 or 4 to chat around that, and then we'll come back together and come back together.
Good
morning. We're not in a church. My wife so I just get dragged. That's a benefit. Okay, French speaking. You're bilingual. How long have you been there?
I was there. That's why
So I'm the lead pastor here. I started a year and a half ago. The second career. I spent the majority of my career in civil liberties. So, a bit of a career change. Kind of nice. So how do you capture the challenges around it's different outside the church, but that's your job. And people listen to you because of your position. And then when you come into the church, yeah, it's a very different approach. Because you could have people and then they just choose not to do it.
My first way is
You would think that is how it That's because they're just thinking about themselves. And we live in a world that tells everybody just to think about themselves. And it makes a difference. So are there others in your church here? Yeah, I've met some other people. It's nice to be here with people all across Canada, rather than staying cold and early on Right? So, our biggest challenge right now is the congregation is older. 50% of our congregation is over 70 years. And the church is in a position that if they don't make some radical changes, they won't be there anymore. So now, if you get these people that have been a part of that church for 40 years, 50 years, and they don't want to change anything. Even though they know where to go. Well, in a couple of years, they're just going to hold on to their and so now it's that challenge of how do you lead people when they don't necessarily want to walk that path. Okay. Yeah.
All right, we'll come back together. So we just want to finish your thoughts, and then we'll bring the group back together.
That's part of the problem.
Okay, this is good. I'm glad that this animates you, and that's the hope, and that's the point. It's okay if your blood pressure rises a little bit as we talk about the conflicts that we are immersed in, and it shows that this matters and it's relevant to the people, to all of us, to all of you. So what came up for you? If a few people don't mind sharing maybe some of those words, like if you could distill it, like what are some of those themes or some of the complexity, any comments that people would make?
Noticed PTSD from past conflicts.
Okay. Yeah, coming up now.
Just kind of as an underlying theme,
Yeah,
which leads to conflict avoidance, like in my case.
right. Yes, yes. So however conflicts were handled in the past or not handled or poorly handled, the pain, the experiences, those stay in our body. And if they don't find their way out, if they're not processed, then they can activate those triggers quite quickly for us. And then as ongoing or future conflicts come up, then it's just that much more sharp. And so, yeah, that makes sense to not even want to engage it because you just don't know what your own reactivity will bring up for you. Thanks for sharing that.
I think there's a sense for some that conflict comes out of a cultural background in the church or practice, and then trying to faithfully follow change, but how do we do that?
A cultural background, do you want to say more to that?
Perhaps a theological view
Okay.
on a specific topic, like women in ministry, or
Sure.
and I know a number of churches have gone through that complementarian to egalitarian change, or other theological issues, or leadership personalities, and just how do you navigate through some of those cultural pieces that people haven't even thought through why they feel the way they feel, maybe, but then they're reacting emotionally and you're trying to process it, and that's just part of the journey.
Yeah, you have this interplay of emotions and personal experiences and personal stories and then theological differences, and all of that is just mixed together. And so then how do we talk about those things in a purposeful way? Yeah. Thanks for noting that.
Building off the cultural piece, though, specific to Anabaptism, one of the downsides of our traditions have been we've tended to actually be peacemakers.
Peacemakers. I've heard like peacekeepers, like keep the peace, but yeah, what would you say the peacemakers? How does that express itself?
We just stuff it. And pretend that everything's fine.
Yeah, we like to do that. Yeah, it's nice when there's the illusion of peace and it just feels good, but it doesn't actually feel good because there's all these underlying issues that are unaddressed. Yeah.
I think when you hear something from somebody about somebody else, but they haven't, you don't have the full freedom to go talk to the person because it's come through another route.
Right. Yeah, so some of the complexity there of what is your responsibility, or what's your, how are you able to respond to something that's not your conflict, so to speak?
Or you want to address the person that's causing this. Maybe it's happened multiple times, but the information never comes direct, or never with them, or they don't know that this other person is letting somebody else know that they're really hurt by this.
Right, so you get some of that triangulation, and how do you redirect, and who's communicating with who, what to do with that, how to respond. Yeah, that adds to the complexity for sure. Anyone else?
Say interpretation of the narrative. We have a difference. So someone is correcting someone's, not even correcting behavior, but like maybe a challenge to something that's job performance related, and it's the narrative from the person receiving it is, I've been abused. But really, we just trying to keep them accountable for their
Right.
job.
Right.
But in their mind, I've been abused.
Right. Which goes back to that subjective experience of how do you respond to how someone interprets
Yeah.
something as harm, and you're saying, I'm trying to keep you accountable, I'm trying to give you feedback that I'm hoping will support you in your role, and then they're seeing it as an attack, so how do you work through those differences? Yeah, there's a challenge for sure.
I think in the church too, in the community, there's this thought that any conflict that comes up, we need to run right in and fix it. Okay, and especially if it's people, we got to go fix those people.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is many times the conflict has nothing to do with the real issue, and it takes a lot of time, work, prayer, to get down to what the real issues are. And until you get there, there's going to be people hurt along the way, and you just can't fix it all. You can't make everybody feel good.
Yes, that's really well said. Yes, we will chat about that in my plenary session tomorrow as well. But yeah, we get lost a bit in like, what are we actually focusing on? You can start to spin, and what are we addressing? What's the root issue? And we get distracted by focusing on people and conflating the issue with people, and so then we don't actually engage what we need to engage, and so it gets distracting. Yes, there's all this complexity. Thank you everyone for sharing. And for each of us to keep that front of mind, to think about, okay, so what do we do with that? So we're still tasked to respond, and whatever our role is, whatever hat we're wearing, we have an obligation or responsibility to steward the people in our midst. And how do we navigate those conflicts that either we ourselves are engaged in, or that we're supporting others in? And also, if we're supporting others in it, how do we not get enmeshed in the conflict and become implicated in it? So how do we keep healthy distance and navigate that? So out of the research as well, it made me realize that we need a method. People need a way to be able to discern what to do and how to do it in different conflict situations. And so this led me to partner with my colleague and business partner, John Radford. Some of you might know him. He's been in the conflict practitioner space for many decades now. And his origins, he's from South Africa, and he worked with communities in the final decades of apartheid and dismantling some of the violent conflicts that were taking place in communities there. And then later moved to Canada because of a lot of the violence and conflicts there, and just for the safety of his family. Moved to Canada and started doing that same peacemaking, peace-building work here in Canada. So he worked with organizations, and continues to work with organizations and schools and governments, and helping people navigate conflict. And we connected on my master's thesis research, and so we worked on that together. And together we realized that we were both quite disappointed with the current paradigms of conflict resolution, of like how conflicts were being resolved currently. And he found this in his communities and in his work, and I found it in my communities and my work, that it was just disappointing. Like, it wasn't getting the results and the outcomes that we were hoping for. And so together over the last number of years, we've been developing this method called conflict agility, and realizing that resolution isn't always getting at what we hope for, and so what would it look like if we could stay agile in conflicts and be able to navigate them with greater agility? And realizing a few things. So, and I'll explain a little bit more on that Venn diagram at the end. But some of the limitations that we found around conflict resolution is that often people, like was already said, people just want to go in, deal with it, and move on. So they want to quickly, like as quickly as possible, let's just solve it, and peacemakers, like let's just make it go away. So if it's not visible, then it's not there. And so trying to find really quick fixes that were unsustainable and not truly effective. A lot of people, when working in conflict resolution, you can lean towards a standard process. So really wanting like a step-by-step process or a policy or a procedure. So just give me something that I can follow. But when the issue that's coming to us doesn't fit that policy or doesn't fit the threshold of that definition in that procedure, then what do we do with that concern? Do we just toss it and just say, okay, sorry, it doesn't fit our policies, we don't know what to do about it? Or do we have a way to be able to navigate it? So there's limitations there. With conflict resolution at times, if you're just dealing that symptom on the surface, recurring problems can occur. So if we don't take the time, the prayer, the discernment to understand, like, what is it that we're truly facing here? Like, what are the concerns? What is the conflict? What's at the root of this? Then we solve the symptom on the surface, but then the system is still sick, or there's still something that's underlying that then the next week another conflict just reoccurs. So problems don't actually go away, speaking to that same pattern. And then also you have a missed opportunity to learn from the experience. So when we try to get rid of conflicts as quickly as possible, are we doing the work that we need to do to disciple, to bring people along, and to carry people through? So conflict becomes an incredible opportunity for discipleship for ourselves and for the people that we're leading. So how do we do that better? So these are some of the limitations that we found. So then what does conflict agility offer instead? So for being agile, conflict agility holds tension for change. And I'm going to explain this a bit more tomorrow morning. But what does it look like to stay in the conflict, to stay in the tension, and when things get hard, rather than dipping out, hold fast and stay in it, and to be able to find our way through? So how do we do that better? Conflict agility can reveal the connections between one problem, so one isolated incident, one symptom that we're seeing, and substantial opportunities to change the way that the system functions. So rather than just looking at one isolated incident, we can take a step back and look at the broader context and see, okay, what is this conflict a result of? Like, there's something that's happening, there's a way that we communicate, there's a way that we're functioning that isn't really helping us, or it's leading to these conflicts. So then how do we address the broader context? And then sometimes we don't actually want to resolve the conflict. So conflict resolution gets at this presumption that we want conflicts to go away, but sometimes conflicts actually, they're communicating something that's important. So I know for John and the communities that he worked with in South Africa, conflict resolution was ineffective. Like, these communities were uprising against civil war, and the conflict meant that, like, they wanted change. So they didn't want the conflict to go away. They needed to find ways to navigate it without violence. They needed to find other means to do so. But they didn't want it to just go away, because their voices needed to be heard. They needed to communicate the changes that they wanted to see. And so sometimes there's tension and conflict that we need to hold fast to. You were saying, there's someone saying about the accountability. So when we're holding someone accountable, when there's someone in their role that's not functioning in a way that is effective or is meeting the needs of their specific role, we don't want that conflict to go away. That tension needs to stay there, because tension, and if we stay in that tension and manage it effectively, it can lead to the change that we hope to see. So we need to leverage conflict, not get rid of it. So I'll turn it back to you as you keep these things in mind, and as you're thinking about this difference, asking, can you recall a time when simply resolving a conflict didn't feel like enough, or it felt like it fell short, or it didn't really meet the hope that you'd have, and when something deeper was left unaddressed? So it's a big question, and you might have specific stories, but just reflect with 2 or 3 people around you if you've seen this limitation of resolution and a hope that you'd have for deeper change. So we'll take a few minutes there.
I'm not sure I can understand the after we worked through I still didn't feel like everything that was addressed, or everything that needed to be addressed, so on the surface, everything is okay, but underneath, there's still and I think that sometimes is a struggle. Somebody comes to me or comes to you and they have a problem, they're upset about something.
Address.
Are they really upset about that? Or is there something else?
Sometimes I feel like it's not but they are if they are in the same reality of work, yeah, they work in the same.
Okay, we'll come back together. I know that will feel way too short, so we're cutting this one off a little bit short. My assumption is the answer is yes, that everyone can think of an example where maybe resolving a conflict didn't feel like enough. Anyone want to comment on what came up in your conversations? You don't have to share specific stories or examples, but yeah, just how you related to this, or if you did.
I think the risk of knowing if you really ask, we're talking about in conflicts of like the uncensored or unfiltered, like the raw emotion that someone might be feeling, and just as a leader or someone knowing like, if we're gonna go deeper, I don't know how long that will take or where that will go, or if more conflicts will surface. So it's just this like, I think fear of just, if we stay on the surface and address just the most top level, kind of high level, let's give a solution to this piece.
Yeah.
We don't have to go there, it can feel more certain and predictable. But knowing, like we were saying, that feels like peacemaking, and we didn't get to the other piece, but there's just so much risk and uncertainty when you go deeper, it can feel like.
Right. Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, it speaks to the fear and why, like, we either don't go towards or we try and fix it quickly because you're opening up a can of worms that I don't know where this path leads.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty there. And then the irony being that often when that is our approach, it just festers and it becomes much bigger and explosive anyway. So we'll have to take time on either side, but it's like, do we do it at the front end or does it just come back to bite us later? But yeah, no, that makes sense. Others?
Talked a little bit about patterns repeating themselves, so you can address a conflict in the moment and then feel like it's been addressed, but then the same behavior, just harmful behavior, pops up again and again and again. It kind of re-aggravates the old one. So it's like, okay, was that really resolved? Or so we talked about like the sort of latent.
Yes. Yeah, it just kind of keeps recurring.
Yeah.
So how do we get to those deeper layers?
Yeah,
And
it
how do
seemed
we
like we understood each other, and then but
Yes.
now it's so.
Yeah, you don't always know that there's something deeper going
Yeah.
on. Like you think, like, okay, I think we've managed that well, and then suddenly that it can be like a trigger or something that's just unaddressed that comes up again.
I think sometimes not wanting to deal with the conflict is sometimes a fear, depending on who the person is. If it's a family, and I pastor in rural Manitoba, a family who's been in the church for a long time. Well, you don't want to deal with that because, that's how some would say, right? And yet, if you don't deal with it, as I was saying, you bury it, and it becomes worse. It becomes, instead of one weed, becomes multiple situations. And every place is different too, in every situation. For me, I can deal with conflict because I'm an interim pastor.
Right, sure.
And I'm not due, you know, I thought I'd be there 6 months, but I've been there 2.5 years in this church as an interim pastor. But also, I'm not Mennonite brethren.
Okay, so you can dip out on a few.
That's a whole different thing, right? So, I mean, they say, okay, well, you're done. I said, well, okay, no problem. I'll go in as an interim pastor somewhere else.
Do what you can.
So, but I think you have to, because if not, you know, you dealt with it a little bit, you know. So it's not one thing just to take, when you're dealing with conflict, just to take the scab off.
Yeah.
But get down to the root of the issue.
That's right.
Because if not, it's going to be still there in the church, and it can then destroy the church.
Oh, for sure. And as an interim, like you have different, you're coming in, you have the fresh eyes to some of those recurring patterns that they themselves might not see because it's the water they swim in. And so there's different vantage points that you approach it. And then, like you're saying, it's like, okay, how do I address these conflicts in the time that I'm with this community? And then also, what does it look like when I leave this community? And is their capacity stronger for conflict, or how am I leaving it? And so there's other, concerns, factors that a transition pastor or an interim pastor would factor in.
Yeah, and I, you know, someone asked me, well, why aren't you the pastor? You know, been there 2.5 years, Pastor Cal. You know, and I said, well, you know, this is my calling. And my calling is different than, you know, I'm there as an interim pastor, and, you know, bring in a different flavor too from. So you all know I'm Pentecostal. So I'm ordained to Pentecostal as you can. So I mean, I bring a different flavor in there, but it's not when there's no real one flavor when you're dealing with conflict. Conflict is conflict. Issues are issues, and so you have to deal with it.
I just want to comment on the phrase of go back to it again, of don't feel like it's enough. Because it's experience has shown me too that when people come with conflict, they can also come with an expectation of outcome. Right. And you can have two different people, and so one may feel like it was enough, but not the other.
Yes.
And so there's there's still the relationship. The issue destroys the relationship because of that.
Yes, that's fair. Yeah. So the different expectations of those outcomes, and how do you journey with people in that, and yes.
A experience that I shared was I remember dealing with a situation where there was a problem. This is years ago. Between someone who was a senior executive and somebody that reported to them. I'll spare the details, of course. I thought that the problem was on its way to being resolved as a result of discussion with both. We didn't have an HR department. Only to find out that there was much more underneath the iceberg that involved many more people. It wasn't just two.
Right.
It just went much deeper.
Right.
So it was unaddressed but needed to be addressed.
Right. And that's where it was being maybe illuminated, or like a pain point where it's like, okay, like this is coming to the surface, but then do we do the groundwork to explore, to probe, like, okay, is this a symptom of something larger, and who else is implicated, and how do we bring those voices into the mix, and how do we unpack the fullness of what that situation is. It adds to the complexity. So all of these examples, thank you for sharing and noting those, and the limitations of resolution have led John and I to explore and unpack equipping people with a method of conflict agility. And I'll give you like a brief overview in this session. This is usually like a multi-day, multi-hour course, so you're not going to get the full, it'll feel insufficient, but I want to just introduce you to some of the overarching themes of it. And if this is something that you want further equipping in with your teams or your organizations, there's a card on your seats that you can seek out more information and contact us if that's something that interests you. And so the method, as a way to remember, it's just like a hand heuristic that is, so a pause, and then a go in, a go up, and a go out. So this invitation to pause, and often we feel in conflicts like we just don't have time for this, like we just have to respond and we have to deal with it right now, and we get into the mix of this like tyranny of the urgent, but the conflict will be there today, it'll be there tomorrow, and so how do we just take a moment as leaders, especially people tasked to respond, to just take a moment and to pause and to think, okay, what are we facing here? And then as we do that, and as we give ourselves that permission to just take a breath, to take a moment, and this breath or this moment can happen like right in the midst of conflict. So if you're in a conflictual conversation, or you're feeling your blood pressure rise, or you're feeling that heightened tension, that invitation to pause can happen right in the moment. Or it can also be a longer pause as we process longer, more complicated, or more entrenched conflicts that we're navigating. And then from that place of pause, then we are going in. And often this is so overlooked in the conflicts that we're experiencing. We go out first. So we react, we respond, it's other people, it's what they're experiencing, it's what they're doing. And how do we first take that moment to pay attention to ourselves of, okay, what is happening for me? What are the triggers or the trauma that's in my story that's causing me to react? Or as they're sharing this experience, what's the story I'm telling myself about this situation? How am I filling in the blanks? So we need to pay attention to ourselves and understand what's going on internally for us. From that place of self-awareness, we can go up then, and we can gain an understanding of the system. That's where we're looking at the broader context. Like what's going on around us? Who else is involved? What else is happening? What are the greater patterns and symptoms that we're not addressing, and ultimately what needs to change? So we're taking a little bit more perspective and gaining more understanding of the situation, and then from that place of self-awareness and awareness of the system and the broader context, then we're going out and then we're responding. And then we want to think about, how do I position myself to act? What's the role that I have? What's the responsibility I have in this situation, and how am I going to do that? What will I do? So that's a quick overview. We're going to go a little bit more in depth with the few minutes that we have left. So going in, so just recognizing that that first step of going in is important, because what's happening in our inner world is motivating our outer world. So we need to understand what's happening within us. And different generations and different cultures and backgrounds have different relationships to our bodies and to understanding how we react in conflict. And so how do we honor our bodies, and how do we understand, okay, I'm reacting and I'm feeling activated because something is important to me that is feeling threatened. And so when this is happening, we often get stuck in conflict because we're terrible thinkers when we're under threat. And this is just a reality that when we're feeling threatened in whatever way, shape, or form, our brains shut down. And I'm going to go over this a little bit more tomorrow, so you'll get a refresher. You'll get to hear this twice. But our brains, when they interpret a threat to something that's important to us, our amygdala sends a response to our hypothalamus that sends out adrenaline, and that's where we get that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So these are just this unconscious reactivity in conflict, and that's often where we first go to. We just go out, we just respond. And when this is happening, all the energy that is in our bodies is going towards this survival response. So we're trying to protect ourselves, we're trying to survive in the conflict. And when this is occurring, our brains, our prefrontal cortex is shut off. So our amygdala is reacting and our prefrontal cortex is shut off, and that's a problem because this is the part of our brain that's responsible for attuned communication, emotional regulation, problem solving, empathy, all of these incredible skills that we desperately need in our interpersonal reactions and interactions, we don't have. So that's why. It's like it makes sense why conflicts escalate, why we get stuck, why we don't know what to do, because our brains literally don't work in the ways that we hope for them to do. So our cognitive performance is limited. So this is where this method, the pausing and the going in, seeks to mitigate this. And when we do that, when we attend to that inner threat and that interiority, what's going on in our minds and our bodies, we diffuse the threat. So just by paying attention to it, just by being able to identify, okay, I feel activated for these reasons. This is what feels threatened to me. This is what's at stake. This is what's happening in the conflict. Just by giving ourselves that data and that information, our brains regulate, they start to slow down, the blood starts to flow again, and we get our prefrontal cortex back. And that's huge. So we need to do that just from that pausing and that going in. So that first step is noticing our reactive symptoms. So when we feel our heart pounding, we start to overheat, we start to feel like that brain fog, all of those symptoms of like, okay, your systems are going like mayday, like something's wrong, something's off here, something's just not right. You might not even be able to quite pinpoint what it is, but your bodies will tell you. Noticing that reactivity is the first step to then acknowledge, okay, I need to pause, I need to go in, I need to do some journaling, figure it out. So greater understanding of the threats identified and the emotions experienced can start to diffuse that reactivity, so we need to do that. One of the helpful frameworks is from the insight approach, and this gives us some different categories of what those threats can be. So again, there won't be enough time to go through all of this in depth, but it just helps to pinpoint. So the more specific we can be, just the more helpful data it gives us to be able to respond to what's going on. So we can experience a personal threat when when our sense of self is at stake. So when that leader is receiving that concern or that complaint and they have to respond, they might feel a personal threat themselves. They might realize like, okay, what does this say about my leadership? What have I done that has allowed this to go on? What have I missed? So it might speak to their identity, how they view themselves as a leader. And if a leader is feeling activated personally about themselves in their own role, how are they going to respond to this effectively? So paying attention to what feels activated for me in this conflict is important. And then also, the leader can start to identify what are the personal threats amongst these individuals. So the threats can be both, these are all subjective to individuals. So in that three-structure relationship, each person will experience different threats and understanding those. It might be a practical threat, so you might identify something practically when something we care about, we need to make our life function or want to achieve is at stake. So when you've got complaints or concerns or conflicts, people are concerned about their jobs. What does this mean for my employment? What does this, leaders are thinking, what does this mean if I have to let this person go, or what are the disciplinary actions, or how will then how will I fill that role? What happens to the ministry? Like there's all these practical concerns that then start to come into play that are relevant. A relational threat is when our sense of how people should interact in their roles is at stake. So when you have expectations of how someone should function or what they should do, and that is not being met, then you feel that gap relationally and acknowledging. So in this three structure as well, the complainant might feel a gap in how this supervisor, this person overseeing them is functioning. This leader might feel a relational gap in how this individual is functioning. So any expectations that are not being met, that can feel like a relational threat. And then finally, a structural threat, when our sense of the way systems are set up or functioning is at stake. So this can be like organizationally, the systems that are functioning, like if those aren't operating in a way that's like in the way that we want, as well as like societally and just like in our broader context. So we can identify those at multiple levels. So this just gives us a helpful way to categorize, because how you respond to a personal threat, so a sense of self, like you feeling like your ego is bruised, and how do you manage that versus a practical threat that you can approach in a different way. So identifying the threats gives us better pathways to respond to the conflicts that we're navigating. Brené Brown is a helpful researcher and thinker in this space, and she notes this, that many people lead from a place of hurt and smallness, and they use their position of power to try to fill that self-worth gap. Identifying the source of the pain that's driving how we lead and how we show up for other people is important, because returning to that place and doing that work is the only real fix. So it's just acknowledging that need for understanding, so to go in and to understand what are the wounds that drive us, what are the gaps and the wounds and the healing that we need to take, that we need to do the hard work in, that's going to help us navigate conflicts more effectively. Like what's activating us, and what are those triggers that maybe we haven't really attended to that could be causing conflicts to remain stuck or to escalate. So we need to do that self-discovery work. So I won't have you share on this, but just to think for yourself, to reflect when you last felt reactive in a conflict. So you felt that activation, you felt that sense of, okay, something's off, something's going on. What might that reaction have been trying to tell you about what mattered most to you in that moment? So the goal of going in is not to shame people for having emotions and for being reactive. It's to understand that we are human, we are created beautifully, and created in a way that communicates to us, and our bodies tell us what is going on, what's important to us, what are we experiencing. So rather than having shame or distancing ourselves from that internal reality, how do we understand it? And how do we harness that data and gain a greater understanding of ourselves? And so then from that diffusing of the threat, we want to go up, we want to gain understanding on the context itself. So we're asking these questions of like, what's happening in my context and what can change or what needs to change. So we're starting to identify, okay, what are my options? What can we do? And this gives us greater agility. So rather than just like, okay, this happened, this is what needs to happen, and like we get really linear of just like we need to just act in this way, going up gives us options. It helps us to stay agile in a way of like, okay, I could do this, this is a factor, and we start to take into account all of what's going on in our context so that we have a greater understanding. And so we approach this with a systems thinking in a way that, so systems thinking in conflict is just a way of understanding and analyze complex issues by looking at the whole system rather than just isolated parts. So rather than looking at the individual instances, we look at them in the context of that they're situated within, and we look at all the factors that might be implicating the conflict itself. One of the methods that we use in our work, John and I, is block mapping, and this is a method that allows individuals to visualize a conflict system. So John originated this method in South Africa. His wife is a kindergarten teacher and had these foam blocks, and he was realizing that like the communities he was involved in, the conflicts that he was navigating, they were quite complex, they were hard to understand, and he was working with other mediators and so communicating across networks, and it was hard to be able to communicate like what is going on. And so in one instance he was sitting down at a restaurant with a colleague and started using the salt and pepper shakers and just objects on the table to start to communicate like, okay, so this is happening and this person's involved and there's these dynamics, there's these like underlying tensions and how they were all implicating, and then realized like, okay, the person across the table are like, yeah, I get it, it makes sense. So then he went to Lorraine's classroom, got her blocks, and started using these in communities. And so since I've just continued to use these blocks to be able to take what's happening in our heads and what's swirling around us, and to be able to put it in the center and to be able to visualize it. So it's a way to articulate like what is actually going on and how does this issue relate to this issue and how is that feeding into this issue. And it's a way to collaborate with people to be able to say, okay, how are you seeing it? How am I seeing it? And it becomes a way to just visualize the conflict itself. And then from that place of visualization, it's not just like, okay, how do we just like kind of vomit it all onto the table, and like how do we, it's not just about unpacking all the issues, but then truly finding leverage points. So what in this system, in all this complexity, are small shifts that we can make that can affect change in the whole system. So you're not trying to fix all of it, and that's another shift, so away from resolution to agility, where we're not trying to just solve this whole complexity, but we're trying to make a movement in one way. So it starts to give people movement where they can take a small step and a small action rather than feeling like they have to fix everything. And so this can be done 2-dimensionally or 3-dimensionally, and you can do this yourself just with sticky notes. You don't have to have blocks or just like objects around your house, but it can be a helpful way to, I use this in the conflicts that I work in as well, either with groups or even just on my own when I'm supporting groups. I'll do my own mapping just to be able to capture it for myself as well and to help visualize what's going on. So we're looking at, when we're block mapping, we're looking at pain points, so those places where there's problems that are identifiable. We're looking at also neutral points, so the whole thing is not just conflict, there's also, or the pain points, there's also things that we want to identify that are just relating to the issues that we want to note down. And then we're ultimately trying to find leverage points, so we're trying to identify like, what can change, what can we do that can respond to it. So for, the purposes of, I'll just finish and then we'll come back to questions and also just reflecting on this. If you think about going up in this idea of gaining perspective and context, how might this support the way that you're responding to conflict? So just invite you to think about that. I'll come back to that. And then the final one is to go out. And so as we are in a much better place of self-awareness and awareness of the context and the system of what's going on, then how do we act? So this is not the first thing we do. This is a place, we've discerned what we want to do and what needs to happen. And then we need to position ourselves, okay, am I coming alongside this individual? So how am I relating to this change that I'm hoping to make? Who do I need to talk to? Where do I need to go? So you start to unpack and develop a plan, a discerned plan of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Skip that. So yeah, how do we know that we're practicing conflict agility? So this Venn diagram kind of puts it all into play of, okay, what are we actually doing when we're practicing this method? And it's purposefully in this way because it's not a linear step-by-step plan, so you're consistently and continuously going in and up and out, and you might find yourself just cycling that. And so as you go in, and you're embracing that inner track of what's going on within you and within us, we gain perspective. And as we cross over into that going up, we gain perspective not only of ourselves, but we gain perspective of the context that we're in. And that helps us to gain more awareness. And then as we go up, if we start to identify leverage points, then we know, okay, we're being agile. We can identify what options we have, what we can act on, what decisions we can make, and what are these shifts that we can make that will produce the changes that we hope to see. Finally, once we go out, then we gain feedback. So as we act, there's always feedback. Like there's always information that's coming back to us. So as we have that conversation, as we initiate that response, as we go about the decisions that we make, what is the feedback that we're getting? And then that causes us to cycle back to that going in of, okay, how am I integrating that feedback? How am I responding to that feedback? Am I defensive about that feedback? Why am I defensive? What's coming up for me? And then the process just continues. So this is the fullness of that piece. So yeah, we'll leave it with this and questions that you might have, as well as any comments you might have around how this framework might change the way that you engage current or future conflicts. So we'll open it up now for questions of, yeah, just what's sitting with you, comments, questions, or anything that you want further clarity on.
Jodi, is it important that both people kind of understand a framework like this when you're kind of entering into?
Yeah, it's a good question, and a lot of people often ask, like, so it's like, okay, if I'm equipped with this, how do they become equipped with this? I think we often underestimate the power that we have to influence a situation, and we put almost too much onus on other people, or it's like, oh, I can't do anything about it, or it's outside of my control. And I think with this, my hope is that this gives us the capacity to be able to navigate to the extent that we're able. So there are limitations. We can't control how people respond, how they engage. But even if someone is responding to us with their own reactivity, if they're defending, if we're kind of like hitting a wall, they're shutting down, how do we then, that's feedback, right? So that's the feedback that we're getting. Okay, how am I then going in and reducing my reactivity? So they're responding in this way, they're shutting down, they're defending, they're not engaging. So then what are my options and what's coming up for me? So we can still do that self-work of understanding, okay, how am I processing their response or lack of response or poor response? What are my options, like going up and listening that, and then ultimately what I'll do. So it might not lead to the outcomes that we hope for as like a mutual collaborative processing of a conflict might, but we can still, it keeps us agile as individuals in systems that might feel stuck as well.
Jodi.
In what you just described, is there a way to approach the situation where you can reduce the other person's immediate reaction? Like give them that opportunity to pause, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, so as we become equipped with this method, we can invite others and also like encourage and disciple and help them, equip them in the same method. So we can help them pause, like you're saying, or to go in, and we can ask questions around, okay, so you can notice their reactivity, so like, I'm noticing that this is, challenging for you to hear, or I'm noticing that you're not engaging in this, what's going on for you? Like, we can just ask them simple questions that help them unpack their own going in processing. So what are you feeling right now? What's coming up for you? What feels important to you in this? Like open and curious questions that are not leading, but just like open the space. Because if we're not managing our own reactivity, we won't ask those questions.
Jodi, how does this, I mean, as I look at this, like, to me it jumps out that this feels like it's nurturing emotional intelligence in ourselves first.
Yes.
Potentially others. Can you just comment?
Yeah, that's one of the outcomes that you'll see on the website. So greater emotional intelligence, so awareness of ourselves and our emotions as well as others, and so developing that capacity. So emotion, because it's both identifying, as we go in, we're identifying both the threats, so like what's at stake for us, as well as what we're feeling about what's at stake for us. And the more granularity, like the specificity we can get about our emotions, the better we can reduce that reactivity. So being able to identify for ourselves, so rather than, I'm angry or I'm happy or, some of these more general emotions, if we can pinpoint, like, I feel disappointed because of this scenario, or I feel that it was unjust, or I feel, just like saddened, like we can get greater awareness of what we're actually feeling.
Do you feel in conflict resolution scenarios, does it ever feel like it isn't fair that everyone else gets to feel their feelings and you just have to be aware of them?
Yeah, I mean, that's I guess it depends on the kind of person that you want to be and the kind of impact you want to have on those around you. And yes, so there can be people that just splay out their reactivity and just have their way with their emotions. But then what kind of impact does that leave on those around you? And so for ourselves, regulating emotions doesn't mean we ignore them, and I don't hear you saying that. So regulating and being aware of our emotions is truly a way to be compassionate towards ourselves and to give ourselves space. And so we just find, ideally, places to process those emotions in a way that's like safe and not like just the reactive places. So maybe that is just with yourself and like attending to what you're feeling. Maybe that is with a close friend or a mentor or someone that you trust or a therapist or any of these spaces that you can feel heard and validated in your emotions. Because this doesn't mean that you just get to get walked all over and your emotions don't matter and everyone else's are louder and more pervasive, so they just get the floor. It's finding the places that you need to process those emotions and that understanding so that you can engage in those encounters in a way that you're proud of and that you are beyond reproach.
Just a follow-up, is it possible that sometimes the people who are reactive or very open wear their heart on their sleeve a lot? If let's say I am less or say less or don't share everything that I feel bothered about. But over time, does that give people too much opportunity to always feel like I can share all my junk with everybody, and I'm not expecting the other person to share with me. Like you're almost giving them freedom to overshare so much all the time.
Right.
And if you're not the one that doesn't, then you're like almost giving them that permission.
Right. So you're kind of like enabling that.
Yeah. It's almost so they always feel like I can always go and just openly share 100% of the junk I'm feeling, and never feel like the other person either stops me or says wait a second or whatever. I don't know. I don't
it's a good point. No, that makes sense. I think often people keep going and they're just loud about their emotions when they don't feel heard. So if we can help people feel understood and help them process their emotions in a way that that they feel heard and understood, it will diffuse it much quicker than just them trying to get that attention. Because often we're really loud or emotional or like dysregulated because we feel like no one's listening to us, or we feel like nothing's changing, or we feel like unheard. And so the better equipped we are at giving space, appropriate space, and understanding, like just being able to say to someone, like, I hear you're upset right now, you know, and then they're like, yes, and then like, I'm hearing like these are the things that are upsetting you, or is it this, or is it that, like being able to help them pinpoint what it is they're upset about, what it is that is at stake for them. That will bring it to an end, or it'll diffuse it much quicker than just giving them an open forum. So as much as we can help people understand, process, regulate their emotions, and help them do that going in process, it should support them rather than enable.
I'd like a follow-up question. But
Yeah.
But like, so let's say you do the whole thing, right? And you come to this place where you feel like stuck, where, is it ever that the action is, like you said, like sometimes just the conflict has to happen, or, you know what I mean? Like, what if you go through this, and is there ever a sense where someone does have to let go?
Yeah, like it doesn't always have the hoped for
Yeah, like
outcomes.
it's not like they kind of like, oh, this got resolved,
just
and
worked,
we
yeah.
heard each other, and like we
Yeah.
both grew, and this is awesome. Now we can make changes. Like that would be wonderful. But I'm
That's
just
the
curious if
Yes.
it ever, yeah.
Yes, that really would depend on your role in the scenario, the authority that you have, the power that you have, the influence that you have. That can kind of determine what we can do, what decisions we make. Hopefully those get unpacked in like the going up processing and in the discerning leverage and like those options that you have. So some of those outcomes might be less favorable, like the overall like desired outcomes. If that's not happening, then your options might become more limited. But ideally, like you don't start with those limited options of like they're fired or not fired, or like, you know, it's like it doesn't have to always be like they go or I go. But if it does come to those points, like sometimes things need to, like we need to make decisions for ourselves or for the organization or for the church or for that are like not ideal, but yeah, ideally it's more discerned based on like the process that you've already taken.
Okay, cool, thanks.
And the reality is that this is not easy, and that's why it's often not done. So this is not the pathway that most people take, and especially like this all sounds great now. Like we're all sitting here pretty like neutral, but when you are activated and when you're in the midst of it, your brain will like contract, and it'll feel quite narrow, and it'll feel like there's no options. You'll feel like the parts of your brain that you need to process this will feel limited to you, and so that's where this is like against our default behaviors. And so as much as possible, if we practice this, like I practice this as much as I can in my daily relationships, as well as in all facets of life and work, and trying to embody the method so that it is a muscle that just like becomes practiced. And because when we most need this, it won't feel natural. And so as much as we can practice this, like noticing our reactivity, going in, okay, what felt agitated? So even like, you know, driving in traffic, like, okay, my blood pressure just rose, like what was it? And is it actually the car in front of me, or is it something that I'm processing with my spouse, or is it something else? So being able to just take those like minute moments to, okay, what is truly activating me right now? What caused that, you know, overinflated reaction? Is it really this, or is it something else? And then what are my options? What will I do? Like being able to process that every day. There's always opportunities that you'll feel reactive. And when you start to notice it and use that muscle more regularly, it'll just become much more natural and just less resistance there. Yeah.
Okay. What happens when the other person won't engage? Like our congregation or mine is famous for dropping something and then just going, okay, that's done. But they've left all the conflict on the table and they won't re-engage after that.
Yeah. So you're saying like someone brings a conflict
Yeah, they
forward?
bring conflict in, you know, we hate when you do this or something, and then they just won't engage again after that. It's done.
Right.
And it's usually in a congregational meeting. You try to follow it up, and there's no follow-up. It's like, well, I've said my piece, I'm done.
Right. Yeah. I mean, tricky.
How do you re-engage? Like, is there anything
Yeah. I mean, each situation will be different. I feel
Yes,
like
of
if as much as possible, as you're able to engage in the moment, so to be able to invite the person, like, so the person says their piece and then, maybe walks away, but if they're still in the space, like, asking more questions, seeking to understand, so you're inviting them into the process, and it's more opportunity for them to feel heard and to unpack the situation. Then it becomes a collaboration. So it's not like, okay, they saying like, okay, now it's yours, like, deal with it. So the mantle of responsibility isn't just put on you. Can you take that tension and put it between you and invite them into it? So trying to reframe, like, I think as leaders, we often like put it on ourselves, like, okay, like, this came to my attention, now I'm tasked with responding. Like, I have to do it because they said I have to respond to it. But taking that moment to pause and think, okay, who needs to actually be involved in this? Like, does this person that's bringing the conflict, are they involved? Like, do they need to be invited into this? Like, are there other people involved? Do they need to be invited into it? So first, like, asking questions, both of the situation and of the person, and not just right away, like, owning the whole processing of the conflict, because that's where it becomes that discipleship opportunity. It's like, who are we bringing along? How are we bringing people along? And taking the time that it actually requires to process that conflict, and recognizing, like, I think so often leaders think it's like, oh, it's a distraction, like, we're doing ministry and this conflict comes up, and I think, like, what else are we doing? Like, we're in the business of people, and like, this is the ministry, and this is part of the work. And so I think as leaders, where we put our time and energy also shows what we prioritize. And so if we can give space to actually processing and dealing with conflicts and using them as an opportunity, we're going to have a greater impact in our discipleship.
I think we're pretty much done. Yes. I think one thing I learned over my years in pastoral ministry is I used to be scared of conflict, and now I see, oh, this conflict's actually bringing up something that's important to talk about, right? And so how can we get rid of that fear and say, it's exposing something that actually needs to be dealt with, and seeing that as something that God's bringing to light, and something that we can potentially use, hopefully, for good, for His good, for our good, for His glory in our churches. So thanks for coming out. We have lunchtime now for the next little bit, and then 1 o'clock is the next breakout session. So thanks, Jodi.
Great, thanks, everyone.